I'm Mac.
I'm Adrian, and this episode is about debunking queerphobia using facts and logic.
All right, we're talking about some really graphic abuse, suicide, violence, validating queerphobia. So this is our trigger warning. Some of the stuff we are talking about is really serious, even triggered me, the writer. So just mega warning here. All right, myth 1, homophobia is not an issue in the United States.
All right, so no, that's false for many reasons. But we want to focus on the fact that conversion therapy is still allowed as like a rebuttal, I guess. So only 20 out of 50 states have banned conversion therapy, and 13 out of the remaining 30 have bills banning conversion therapy introduced, but not passed. So that leaves 16 states where child torture is funded by the state. And since these practices are run mostly by churches, they're funded by the state indirectly. North Carolina, for example, allows conversion therapy, but they don't allow the use of state money.
In case you didn't know, conversion therapy is the practice of trying to turn gay or trans kids straight or cisgender. It does not work, and there's no scientific evidence that it works. Most conversion therapy camps are run by churches or religious groups. The majority of conversion therapy victims are children or anyone under 18. Chemical castration, electroshock therapy, and lobotomies were all tactics used mostly in the past, but there are cases of that still happening today. Now, conversion therapy is mostly talk therapy with an unlicensed professional. The difference between actual therapy and conversion therapy is that conversion therapy doesn't see queerness as an option, but only as a disease that needs to be treated. Kids who undergo conversion therapy are twice as likely to commit suicide than their queer kids their age.
So myth number 2 is that transphobia is not an issue anymore in the States. That's false, very false. So trans people, women especially, are currently being attacked by the law in almost every state. There are 147 anti-LGBTQ plus bills in consideration as of this moment in the US, well, as of filming. 47 of them are trans-specific. All of the bills you are seeing and most of the others are targeting trans women and trying to bar them from women's sports teams. Many conservatives believe that trans women are men in disguise in order to assault women and girls. That's not true. That is blatantly false. And so this leads us into the conspiracy theory that
allowing male to female trans people in women's facilities will open opportunities for assault on women and girls, aka the predatory trans women argument. This argument is horribly transphobic and reductive. Trans women are predators in the same way that the general populace are predators. Almost none. Actually, the amount of trans women predators are even less than the number of cisgendered predators. You want to know my source? Common sense. Okay, trans women are women that just want to pass as a woman. They want to live as a woman. Unless you check everyone's junk before they walk into a bathroom and changing room, then you have no business to give a damn. No trans woman pre-bottom surgery is going to go into a change room and openly anyway. So chillax.
So the whole thing about bathrooms and why we need to let trans people use the bathroom they want to use is because of perception. Each trans person works really hard to pass as their gender, and going into a men's room while looking like a woman is not only dangerous for her, but it makes everybody pay attention to her and realize that she is trans. Trans people don't want to do that. We're not trying to out ourselves constantly. So they just want to live and be respected as we would respect any other cis person. So a nuance to these bills is that they would increase the number of assaults on trans women exponentially. As I said, a trans woman going into a men's room is dangerous, and it's because cis men would be the predators in this situation. Almost every violent act committed against a trans woman is by a cis male. Trans people need to use the right bathroom for their own safety.
Out of the 4 bills mentioned earlier, Arkansas has the most egregious right now. Not only does it include a sports ban, but it would make it illegal for trans kids to receive gender-affirming medical care. It would prevent hormone therapy, surgeries, and gender talk therapy. If a healthcare professional is caught doing any of this, they could face imprisonment. This bill is the consequence of people thinking that
if we allow gender-affirming medical practices on minors, little kids will undergo sexual surgery or hormone therapy. This is not true in the slightest. Top surgeries like mastectomies, the removal of both breasts, or adding breast tissue aren't considered until after a person has gone through puberty. Bottom surgeries to change genitalia are not considered until someone is an adult. And also synthetic hormone treatments don't start until after a child turns 16. The medical treatment that can start at the youngest ages are puberty blockers, so right before puberty. And these can be in the form of implants in the arm or pills that prevent a person from gaining secondary sex characteristics that they don't want. It's common for puberty blockers to be used all through hormone treatments so that the person can go through the puberty of their identified gender.
any child has to speak to a gender therapist for an extensive evaluation before any treatment begins. Gender therapists are specialists in gender transition and assess dysphoria and euphoria related to gender. With the support of the therapist, the child and parents can make a plan on how they want to help their kid transition.
Also, many trans kids don't realize that they're trans until they've gone through puberty and realized, I don't want these things to happen, or they're already adults. So Arkansas is really just trying to control such a tiny population of people that just want to live. All these medical practices reduce suicides and promote a better quality of life. So if you're against that, you're part of the problem. Myth number 5 is that there's more female to male and female to non-binary transgender people in the trans population because girls like attention and girls have internalized misogyny.
TERF extraordinaire Abigail Shrier is an author like the Queen of TERFdom, J.K. Rowling. She wrote a book called Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters. It assumes that the majority of trans people now are born female and are transitioning to males. She believes they are responding to media pressures and internalized misogyny. She claims her sources are credible because she interviewed many lesbians. Many TERFs are lesbians, and because they think a lot of trans men and MBs are actually lesbians with internalized misogyny, they were included in her book. Firstly, the trans population is 50-50, FTM, MTF, FTX, MTX, etc.
So she tries to argue that teen girls are having rapid onset gender dysphoria, which in itself is a meme. So she's arguing this because they apparently show no signs of being trans until adolescence. And all true trans people know that the second anybody turns 4, they gotta know that they're trans. That's not true. That was a joke. No. This is a gross misinterpretation of the situation. AFAB people wearing traditional men's clothing is no longer an oddity, so it's really hard to discern. Also, assigned female at birth people are more likely to be called tomboys as an explanation for masculine behavior. I know that I was. So this environment can kind of repress gender exploration and make it hard to discern when the dysphoria is actually occurring. Social media is giving rise to more trans people coming out, but this is only because it raises awareness, spreads information, and creates safe spaces for people to feel safe to come out. There's no seduction, there's no coercion. Girls are not seeking attention. They're boys or non-binary people or people somewhere else on the spectrum who needed time to figure out who they were.
Myths 3, 4, and 5 are conservative propaganda to try and harm trans people. Instead of conservatives looking for an explanation in science, they try to explain transness by making up these stories. Instead of accepting a concept that's new to them, they turn to demonization.
So myth 6 is that men who have sex with men, or MSM, should not give blood because they are more likely to have HIV and AIDS, aka the HIV and AIDS is a gay disease myth.
HIV and AIDS epidemic of the 80s and 90s was a tragic period in American history and global queer history. The human immunodeficiency virus is a scary and sometimes fatal virus that attacks the immune system by making it attack itself, lowering the overall white blood cell count. Once your white blood cell count reaches below a certain threshold, you are considered to have AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. It is a sexually transmitted disease, STD, via the blood. It was associated with the gay community in the 80s after many gay men reported severe sickness from easily treatable diseases like pneumonia.
So instead of focusing on the suffering of victims of the virus, the media demonized gay people, and it was encouraged by then President Ronald Reagan's silence. So the reason why the majority of people with HIV were gay men is that many didn't have protected sex. That is due to the lack of sexual education around queer people and STDs. Since gay sex doesn't lead to pregnancy, there was little fear of the consequences of not using protection. Any person of any gender can get HIV because it's transmitted through blood. An example is those who use needles for non-medical uses are also at a high risk of HIV. If HIV was a gay-specific disease, then it wouldn't be affecting Southern African populations equally.
The government did not do anything to help the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, and there is still little support for prevention. The current death toll since the first infections is 700,000 people, and the crisis is still not over. There are medications that people can take now to make HIV so low that it's undetectable on tests, but the lack of STD education perpetuates the spread. HIV and AIDS are not gay diseases, they are just diseases. Populations most affected are Black and Latino men, women, and MSM. All states in the US have some kind of ban from MSM from giving blood. For example, in California, a man cannot give blood if he had sex with a man less than 3 months before the blood draw. If the government was actually worried about preventing spread, then they would do an HIV test on everyone before blood draws like they do in some African countries. Only 50% of the HIV and AIDS population is MSM. The rest could be anyone else. These bans are not proof of the health and safety of people coming first, but instead are proof of the strong presence of homophobia in our government.
So myth 7 is that multisexual spectrum identities are not real and that those people are just confused. So no, terms like bisexual and pansexual are generally new, but fluid sexuality has been around forever. Alexander the Great was bi, samurais were bi. Mac and I are both very, very pansexual.
All right, myth 8. Non-binary genders were made up by the modern generation. Non-binary genders have been around since forever too. Two-spirit people have been around since the time Native Americans started being around. The Mahu of Hawaii, similar to the two-spirit, had been around since the dawn of the Kingdom of Hawaii, way before colonization. In Sulawesi, Indonesia, there are 5 genders. Besides male and female, there's kalalai, female people with masculine traits, kalabai, male people with feminine traits, and bisu. Someone is only considered a bisu if they're intersex, but the idea is that the person is metagender, where they have all genders.
So across the greater parts of Indonesia, there are males, females, and warias, which is an umbrella term for any trans or non-binary person. These 2 systems of gender in Indonesia have been around at least since the first time Islam came to the region. Identities that are similar to all of these go back to ancient times. They aren't exactly the same as non-binary identities today because there was no pressure to conform to the European perception of gender. So this kind of segues into myth 9, which is that non-binary genders and sexes are not real.
This myth is in similar vein to the last myth. It's also very transphobic. Literally, intersex people are proof that non-binariness exists scientifically. Gender dysphoria in non-binary people is proof. Dysphoria being cured or assuaged by changing name, pronouns, your body is proof of non-binariness. Sex is not binary. Gender is not binary. There is no female brain or male brain, and hormone production does not equal sex. We have been told things like, well, everyone's a bit NB, and wearing masculine, feminine clothes doesn't make a new gender. What separates people like Adrian and me from cis people or binary trans people is that we are non-binary on the inside. Being non-binary is more than dressing up a little masculine. It's an intrinsic part of us.
Yeah, so in my experience, I was never really comfortable with feminine labels or with being outwardly feminine. And so when I learned that being transgender was actually a thing that existed and that maybe I wasn't just a tomboy, I immediately assumed that I was female to male. I spent so much time during my freshman year trying to pass as a guy, and it honestly just like made me more depressed, made me hate more parts of myself. Like I'm not saying that being FTM is a bad thing. It did not fit for me. I knew I didn't feel like comfortable going from the binary identity of a girl to the binary identity of a guy. So I kind of just felt really lost for a while until I found out that there were identities that were outside or in between the binary. So the moment that I embraced that fluidity and the concept of being neither or both or outside of it completely, my confidence and happiness increased exponentially. And then when I got my top surgery, my dysphoria also decreased greatly and made me a much more confident person.
Dysphoria is real. I am non-binary. I have been othered by so many people growing up because I couldn't fit into anywhere. I told myself what everyone told me. You just need to find your tribe, your people. I wasn't fitting in because of bad friends. It was because I wasn't fitting the gender and expectation that society put on me. I didn't ask to be sworn into femininity's doctrine. When I realized I was non-binary, a brick cell of discomfort, unbelonging, fear, and confusion collapsed. I stepped out of that rubble, a different person, a new person. I felt like I found my people in place because I found myself. We change our pronouns and names so that the Eurocentric perception of gender can perceive us the way we were built.
The labels that we use are for your benefit so that you can better understand us. Moving on. Myth number 10, homosexuality and transgenderness is condemned by God. So this is probably the most controversial topic in an already controversial episode. We recognize that there are many different religions, but we're specifically talking about the Abrahamic religions of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Neither of us is well-versed in any organized religion, so please forgive us if we overstep. We're not claiming that we know exactly what God intended. We're just reporting on these differing interpretations of religious text.
All right, the famous passage of Leviticus 18:22 is the basis for almost all religious homophobia from Jews and Christians. You shall not lie with a man as with a woman. It is an abomination. Sex is referred to by a few different terms in the Bible and Torah. Sexual sins like rape are called uncovering nakedness, but this passage uses lie as in to initiate sexual intercourse. The difference in language leads some theologists to believe that God was saying a married man shouldn't cheat on his wife with a man as he would cheat on her with a woman, which makes sense because it follows the commandment to not sleep with a neighbor's wife as a metaphor for adultery.
So there's also the theory that this passage originally said that man should not lie with a young man as a way to condemn pedophilia. According to theologist Charles Mayer Jr., he believes this passage was referring to how the Israelites did not like the way the Near East casually allowed older men to have sex with very young boys. In historic regions with heavy Greek or Roman influence, it was common for men to have a wife and then a selection of beloveds or young boys to have sex with, going as young as 13. This interpretation makes a lot of sense if you interpret the story of Sodom and Gomorrah as a story of rape instead of a story of gay sex.
All three holy books, the Bible, Torah, and Quran, include the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. They were ancient cities that God smote after the men there committed sexual sin, known as sodomy today. Sodom paralyzed those Greco-Roman towns where men had wives and then groups of young boys. The story is of a crowd of angry men demanding to have sex with two messenger angels for the important biblical figure Lot, or Lut, in the Quran.
So transness isn't mentioned at all in any of these holy books, but it is condemned by religious people because of the idea of sanctity of the body. Before closing, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Religious Institute wrote an interesting piece about transness. By the way, the Institute was made of priests and active members of Christian churches. Their writers came to the conclusion that being trans is not a sin, and neither is sex reassignment surgery. We don't agree with everything they said around queerness in general, but they made it clear that transness does not show up in the Bible and that it is not a sin.
Neither the Quran nor the Prophet Muhammad speak on homosexuality and transness. The passages of the Quran that are used as proof of God hating the gays are almost all from the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. In reading it, I can see how it's not about homosexuality, but a bunch of men having extramarital sex with young boys. There's another cited passage that has been interpreted to condemn lesbian sex, but many interpret it to mean that any sex outside marriage is wrong, and it's not demonizing gay sex.
Harmful views of queer people are strong in Muslim communities because of Sharia law. Sharia law is not a legislative system, but instead a personal law system for Muslims to follow based on teachings from the Quran and Hadith. The Hadith was created after the Prophet Muhammad died, and his students tried to respond to situations based on how they think the Prophet responded. Because Islam is so widespread, the Hadith changes between regions as his followers were everywhere. Anti-gay and trans sentiment filtered in from individual opinions on the matter and not from any Islamic figure.
All right, this was a really serious episode, so we thanks for sticking around.
Yeah, and once again, we're just trying to poke holes into arguments as to why we shouldn't exist. None of these things are meant to hurt the people that believe these things. Just try and change their mindset a little bit.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Bye.